We're very fortunate to have with us today Steve Levitt. Steve is a professor of economics at the University of Chicago. He's the co-author of the books Freakonomics and SuperFreakonomics. Steve is also the winner of the highly esteemed John Bates Clark Medal as the most influential economist in America under the age of 40. Most interesting thing I have to share with you as I introduce him, and that is that the Wall Street Journal has said that if Indiana Jones were an economist, he'd be Steve Levitt.
Thank you very much, Stephen. After the Wall Street Journal dubbed me the Indiana Jones of economics, I was with my lovely wife, Jeanette, at a cocktail party maybe a week or two later. And she didn't realize I was within earshot, I don't think, when one of the other women she was talking to said, "What does it feel like to be married to the Indiana Jones of economics?" And she said, "Indiana Jones, I think Jim Jones would be a more apt comparison." Now, my friend John, who's heard me speak before, said, "I really hope you're going to talk about the work you've done on prostitution today. I think it would be something I'd really like to hear about." Unfortunately, I'm not. I'm going to talk instead about something closer to my own life, my own experiences. And my story begins really with a guy named D. Gale Johnson. He was a professor at the University of Chicago when I showed up there. So I was a young economist, 30 years old. And D. Gale Johnson was in his 80s. He was a legendary economist. He had made great contributions. He was not quite the kind of economist who would win a Nobel Prize, but just one notch below that. And the problem was that he had done his best work in the 1950s. And certainly I hadn't read any of it in graduate school. And someone more mature than me might have taken a different approach. But my approach to D. Gale Johnson was just to try to duck him at every turn. So whenever there was some kind of fact, I felt too embarrassed that a mature person would have either read his work or simply owned up to the fact that he didn't know it. But instead, my strategy for the first 2 years was simply to try to avoid ever having to sit next to him at a faculty luncheon. It turned out, however, that my luck ran out in early October of 1999 when I came into the faculty luncheon. And there was nowhere to sit except next to D. Gale Johnson. So I sat down next to him. And the tactic I've learned with economists, which always works with academics, if you don't know anything about what they've done in the past, is to say, well, what are you working on now? Okay, because that implies that you know what they worked on in the past, you just want to be updated. Now, I hesitated to use this approach because, of course, he was 83 years old, and I wasn't sure he was doing a lot of work now. But I figured I didn't have anything else, so that's what I threw at him. And it turns out that he had become an expert on Chinese economics. And indeed, he was still very, very active. And as he was working on the one-child policy. But as we talked, the thing that was far more interesting to me even than his own work was the work that his daughter had done. His daughter turns out to be someone named Kay Johnson. And Kay Johnson had done all of this work studying Chinese adoption. Kay had been one of the first Americans to adopt back in 1991, had adopted her daughter Lily. And it was an interesting conversation, far more interesting than most of the conversations I have with my colleagues. But it was really unrelated to me. Jeanette and I were starting a family. We had a one-year-old boy, Andrew, and Chinese adoption is the furthest thing from our mind. It was just a week or two later, however, that our son Andrew got meningitis. Completely out of the blue, and passed away 9 days after his first birthday. And in the, in the horror of that event and the darkness that descended on us, many people were very kind to us. And one of the things that really stood out was a note that D. Gale Johnson that he sent to us. And it turned out that about 10 years earlier, his wife had died of meningitis. And in the note and in his visit to my office afterwards, you could feel the rawness of his pain, the same rawness we still feel today about our son. And it was shortly thereafter that I realized that there was more, I think, to our conversation than chance, that really it was our destiny to adopt a daughter from China, to fill the void that we had felt losing our son. And we did that. We embarked on that journey and amazingly became very close friends. I did with Miguel Johnson over the course of the next years. We went through the adoption process, and his daughter helped us and taught us about adoption. And the one part of the trip to China, the one part of the adoption process that I must say I really had dreaded was the 2 weeks going to China. And we actually had the gift of a beautiful daughter, Olivia, was born to us a few months before that we were going to China. So it ended up being me. Jeanette stayed home, and I went to pick up Amanda in China. And I really just gritted my teeth and figured this is going to be the worst 2 weeks of my life, but it's something I have to do. And the amazing thing was it turned out to be the 2 greatest weeks of my life. Because the thing that I realized is when I got Amanda is that I had never really been a mother. And the difference between being a mother and a father to a daughter is so different. And with Jeanette at home, Amanda had been in an orphanage, and she wasn't in a half the sky kind of orphanage. She was in a horrendous orphanage where, from what I could tell, the children were, tied down. I mean, she was potty trained at the age of 9 months and had scars on her legs from where she'd been tied down, I think, to keep her on the potty and things like that. But within a day, she was smart enough to realize that I was her mom. And indeed, we met with the caretakers just a day or two after she had been given to me. And it was amazing. She was completely uninterested in them. It was clear she had never been loved in any way, and that she sensed that I loved her. And it was just an amazing bond that developed between us. And it really, it lasted. And I think one of the nicest things that any of our kids have ever said was when Amanda was maybe 3 or 4, and she told someone that Olivia had come out of mommy's belly and that she had come out of daddy's belly. During the time that we were doing the adoption, unfortunately, Miguel Johnson got Lou Gehrig's disease. And by the time I got back, it had progressed quite rapidly. And when I went to see him, to show him the pictures of Amanda of our adoption, it turned out he had completely lost his ability to speak. He still came into work. It's amazing. An 86-year-old guy dying of Lou Gehrig's disease, he cannot speak, but he still came to the office every day. And we sat there that day, and I showed him pictures of Amanda, and he showed me pictures of his granddaughter. And he couldn't speak, and I had nothing to say. And it was an amazing, amazing moment for me. We just sat there, and tears rolled down both of our faces. I mean, it's strange. Chicago economists are like the most heartless, unloving people who ever existed. The thought of 2 of us sharing our the strange mix of joy and loss and sorrow that we shared. It was a very special moment. Now, when I went to pick up Amanda, we got to see an orphanage. And it was a haunting experience. I think this was probably one of the better of orphanages, the fact that they let us see it. But the thing that stuck in my mind after I had been to it was how quiet it was. That there were kids everywhere, but there was no noise. It was almost, if the kids, I don't know if they had been chemically sedated or whether they simply had been sedated by the boredom and the melancholy that existed in the orphanage. And it was shocking and it was haunting. And I could see very soon after how Amanda, with love and care came out of her shell. But for every Amanda who had the good fortune to be adopted, there are 9 or 10 or 50, no one really knows the numbers, girls and a few boys who are left behind to live this life that really is a life that gives you almost no chance. That, in my own academic research, ironically, I've been studying the effects of unwantedness and being unloved. And it's clear that perhaps the single most important ingredient for success in life and happiness in life is being loved. And it was clear that was not a component of what was happening, at least in the orphanage that I saw. Maybe 10,000 American parents adopt a year. They go over to China. They see what I saw. They're haunted by it. But none of us do anything about it. It's we have enough problems, and things to do of our own. And what would we do? What could you do? How could someone attempt to change this Chinese system? And for me, really quickly, the idea of thinking I could ever, not that I really seriously thought I could do anything, faded very quickly. But Jenny Bowen was different. She saw what all these other people saw, and she somehow had the idea that she could change it. And it's a good thing she didn't talk to me about her ideas when she first had them, because I would have done everything I could have to talk her out of it, because it seems completely improbable that you could go and you could take Chinese orphanages and take them from something that is like a warehouse or a holding cell and turn them into something that's like a home. But that's really what Jenny and Half the Sky has succeeded in doing. And I don't need to go into the details of the programs. Jenny, and you've heard about some, Jenny will tell you more. But the simple idea, and it is a simple idea, is that love is an important ingredient in raising children, and these orphanages just were devoid of love. The caretakers were fine, they were workmanlike, but they didn't love the kids. They did it as a job. And the idea was that if you bring love to these kids, you change their lives immeasurably. And one of the beauties of it, it is so cheap. So just doing some back-of-the-envelope calculations, looking at the Half the Sky webpage, it seems like it costs about $2 a day to make a child feel loved. Okay, just in contrast, in comparison, I looked up what it costs to educate a kid in the Chicago public schools for a day. It's $55 a day is spent per kid in the Chicago public schools. It's an incredible bargain to change profoundly a young child's life. Now, a question you might ask as a donor is, does it work? Right? It sounds great. It's a nice story, but how do we know that it really works? And one thing that Jenny and I have talked about is trying to do a really rigorous academic study. They started in 2000. The youngest kids have now grown to an age where really could try to measure the impact. And that's something we're going to do. So short of that, how would you know whether it works? Well, my wife Jeanette had the good fortune to go for a 2-week trip with Half the Sky just a few weeks ago. And her description of the orphanages she was in could not have been more different than what I saw 10 years ago when I was in orphanage. Between the love and the happiness of the kids and the care of the people, Jeanette was just overwhelmed. And what she described was something that is so different from what you would expect if you've ever been to a regular Chinese orphanage. That it's clear in that perspective that it really works. The other thing that Half the Sky has done, which is really, I think, miraculous, is that there are many good charities that succeed at a micro level. They take the money that people give them, and they manage to change a life here, a life there, through interventions. But what Half the Sky has done that really transcends what other charities have tried to do is they've turned their impact into a macro one. That the profound changes that have occurred in the orphanage they've touched have actually led to a sea change in the way that the way the Chinese government thinks about orphanages. So the models that they've used are now being applied and extended over the entire country. And that is really, I think, an unbelievable achievement. To think of a foreigner coming in and showing the Chinese government that you can do things that they never thought of doing themselves. Basically to rethink of what the concept of an orphanage is an amazing, amazing accomplishment. After Jeanette, my wife Jeanette, came back from her trip to China, we were talking, and I asked her what really was the most stirring thing that she saw. And she said that the thing that changed her life the most, Jeanette's life, her whole perspective on life, was the fact that there were these ordinary people working at Half the Sky. But these ordinary people had become her heroes. That basically she had seen that regular people could go out and make a difference. And of course, Jenny, who I'd like now to introduce to call up to the stage, the founder and executive director of Half the Sky, is one of the most heroic, ordinary people I think I've ever come across. So Jenny, please come up now.
Thank you, Steve. That's quite an introduction. I have 2 things to say to you. One is the reason the babies don't cry is because they learn very quickly that no one will come. And 2 is you couldn't have talked me out of it.